Thank you, Harold, and thank you, Nancy. What a privilege to be here at this great institution, and what an honor to be sharing the podium with Harold Holzer. The 29 books about Abraham Lincoln. There is a pedestal of Lincoln scholarship that Harold Holzer rests on. And one of the great thrills of my exercise in writing this book, I'm a technology guy. I'm not a historian. But one of the great thrills was the fact that Harold Holzer liked the book. And that meant so much to me as I was putting it together. There are so many friends here tonight. Thank you all for coming out. But I want to single out two in particular. Marion Maneker of HarperCollins, who, without his belief and vision, this book wouldn't exist. Thank you, Marion. And Carol Wheeler, my best friend. And as Harold will tell you, as somebody who also holds down a full-time job and writes, it is a trial on family life, and you can't do something like this without the kind of support that I got from Carol. And sweetheart, I'm grateful and I love you. Thank you. Let me pick up where Harold left off. The reason that Lincoln wanted to come to New York for Cooper Union was because two reasons. One, it was the heart of the Eastern Establishment Republicans, and secondly, it was the heart of the media. Why was it a media center? It was a media center because of the telegraph. And if you could tell your story here, it would spread like this across the country. The reason it was the heart of the telegraph business, and for the media in particular, was because 4 years after the telegraph was invented by Samuel F.B. Morse, or the first test line was done by Samuel F.B. Morse, in 1848, 6 New York newspapers got together and created a thing called the Associated Press. Previously, newspapers had been local political rags, if you will. And suddenly the telegraph gave the ability to deliver information faster than the mail could to a community. But it was expensive to use the telegraph, and it was expensive to send folks out to collect it. So these newspapers got together and said, let's band together, let's share reporters, let's share these costs. We'll call ourselves the New York Associated Press. And so out of here, because of the network infrastructure and because of the existence of things like the Associated Press, this became the hub. And so this is where you wanted to come to make sure your story got out. And Lincoln was well aware of that. Harold tells some great stories in his book about Lincoln's choice of words. I think that Lincoln ran the first media campaign because of the existence of the telegraph, and he thought about sound bites. The great line from the Cooper Union speech, right makes might, is a sound bite designed to be sent by telegraph and reprinted across the country. But while the media understood how to use this electronic messaging technology, most of the rest of America was befuddled by it. I mean, you got to stop and think that in the middle, it wasn't until 1879 that the light bulb was invented. So electricity was some kind of vague scientific concept. And the idea of sending messages by electronic sparks was more than a lot of people could gather. When Congress debated in 1843, when Congress debated whether or not to fund Samuel Morse's test line, there were laughing amendments offered on the floor of the House to also fund mesmerism, hypnotism, and other wacky kinds of ideas. More congressmen abstained from voting on the Morris test line then voted for it. They were so afraid of what they would be committing themselves to with this crazy idea of sending messages by sparks. Lincoln called it messages by lightning. The other end of Morris's test line was in Baltimore. The clergy in Baltimore got everybody so riled up that Morris's operator in Baltimore telegraphed back that perhaps you ought to stop the test because he feared that there would be violence. As the clergy was preaching, this could only be some kind of satanic operation. So it was into that kind of a milieu of a new technology that wasn't really understood that Abraham Lincoln emerged. When he came to Washington as president, the United States Army, when it wanted to send a telegram, wrote it out in hand, handed it to a clerk, and the clerk went and stood in line at the Central Telegraph Office. So unaware was government as to how to use technology. And Lincoln, without any precedent, without any tutor, without any textbook he could turn to, over the course of his presidency, grasped on this new technology and turned it to his uses in preserving the Union. He went through phases. I think there were 3 phases in Lincoln's use of the telegraph. For the first 14 months of his presidency, he barely used it. First 14 months, he spent fewer than 20 telegrams. Sometimes an entire month would go by and he would send none. He saw it at that point in time as nothing more than a speedy messenger. As a matter of fact, there are many telegrams, or several telegrams that he sent, or letters that he would send that said, respond by telegraph if you have to, if the mails aren't fast enough. But the mails will be fine if you can get here in time. The concept was it was just something that was fast. The other thing that was going on was that the Army was controlling the telegraph increasingly in 1861, and as the war began to build, the Army took over the control of information. And I think that Lincoln's aha moment about the power of electronic messaging came in October of 1861, when he was sitting with General George McClellan, who was the commanding general, at the White House, and a messenger walks in and hands McClellan a message. McClellan opens it, reads it, and puts it away, and doesn't tell the President of the United States what it says. And what it said was, it was reporting on another Union defeat at Ball's Bluff in Virginia, and really telling about that message was that the President's best friend, Senator Edward Baker of Oregon, was killed in that action. And the commanding general had a telegram that he refused to share either the results or the fact that the president's best friend had been killed with the man who was sitting right there with him. Later that afternoon, Lincoln wandered over to McClellan's headquarters. McClellan wasn't there. He went to see the telegraph clerk, Thomas Eckert, and he said, any new news, any new telegrams? Eckert had been instructed not to share information with the President of the United States. And he took the telegram and he put it under his blotter. And he said, Mr. President, there's nothing new in the file. Lincoln went into McClellan's office. He saw the telegram lying there. He came back. He was rather upset with Eckert, who said, I told you the truth. It wasn't in the file. I'm in this conflict between my boss, the general, who says I can't show it to you, and you wanting to see it. Several things happened. The Secretary of War suddenly was, for this and other things, was exiled to Russia. And in January, the Congress passed a law creating the U.S. Military Telegraph Corps, which may have had military in its name, but was a civilian organization, populated by civilians, reporting to the Secretary of War, would take no orders, never had to check anything with anybody in the military, because Lincoln realized in that kind of aha moment that he who controls the pipe, who controls the flow of information, controls, in fact, what that information is.